Hello readers, I'm the Avid reader, and today I thought that I would talk about my one criticism with Thomas Sowell books. So Thomas Sowell is my favorite non-fiction writer. So far I've read 12 of his books, and he writes a lot of interesting stuff on economics and cultural history, and he goes very much against the mainstream narratives we have in history and in political debates often. So it's interesting, and I usually agree with him. I have some differences with him. But the things I disagree with Thomas Sowell about, that's not my main problem with his books. My main problem with Thomas Sowell books is that they're repetitive. So Thomas Sowell has written, I don't know, about 40 books. But when you look at what those books are, a lot of them are basically copies of each other or rehashing ideas that he's already talked about. And I've noticed this by reading several of his books. So for example, the topic of race and IQ. I've already read about that topic in several books. So he talks about it in Race and Culture, but he also talks about it in Intellectuals and Society. I'm pretty sure he talks about it in some other books also. Pretty much all the ideas that are expressed in Black Rednecks and White Liberals, or most of them, were expressed in the Culture trilogy. And some of the history given about immigrants in the United States, in Migrations and Cultures, was also given in the book Ethnic America. Thomas Sowell talks about intellectuals. While there's some new stuff in Intellectuals and Society, there's a lot of things that are basically a rehashing of what he said in Knowledge and Decisions. He's talked about disparities of different groups in different books, and often it's rehashing the same thing that he's already said earlier. So based on the books I've read by Thomas Sowell, the ones that are original in content, I would say that Knowledge and Decisions is pretty original. Basic Economics is also original because it's an economics book for laymen's. Economic Facts and Fallacies, there might be some repetition about disparities there, but it's pretty original content. And the Housing Boom and Bust, for the most part, those are new ideas. But whether you look at Black Rednecks and White Liberals, or what's said in Intellectuals and Societies, or several of his other books, it's just a rehashing of what he said previously. So it annoys me. So although I've only read maybe a third of Thomas Sowell books, I've covered pretty much all of his ideas for the most part. Because what he says in those other books are basically a rehashing of what he said in previous books. So he just released a new book called Social Justice Fallacies. But what he talks about in Social Justice Fallacies is a rehashing of what he's talked about from what I've seen in Vision of the Anointed, or in Intellectuals and Society. He keeps writing these books, but they're kind of just abridged versions of earlier books he's written, which is quite annoying because I live in continental Europe, okay? American Thomas Sowell books are not cheap. Some of them you have to pay 30-40 euros for. So I'm annoyed when I think about it that when you look at these books, they're not original. You're basically wasting your money on ideas you've already learned about in previous Thomas Sowell books. So right now I have 2 Thomas Sowell books left that I want to read. So Charter Schools and Their Enemy, okay, that's an original book, I've checked. But then Applied Economics, there's some new content, so about healthcare, for example. But then I see there's a chapter on the politics of discrimination, or there's different economics things, which I have a feeling he's already talked about in previous economics or history books. Thomas Sowell is a good writer, but he's not necessarily always an original writer. That's my main problem with him. When you write a new book, it's alright that you repeat a bit of what you've said previously, but it shouldn't be a large percentage of the book. And that's what happens with some Thomas Sowell books, unfortunately. And I own, for example, the book Wealth, Poverty and Politics, but then when you look at the topics in it, it's basically a rehashing of what he said in the Culture trilogy. And then you look at different books he's written about, specifically, so affirmative action or civil rights or rhetoric and things like that. It's basically just a longer book of individual chapters he's already talked about in previous books. So yeah, when you're reading Thomas Sowell books, be wary of getting the ones that are actually original, which is not just a rehashing of different ideas. To really grasp what Thomas Sowell ideas are, you should probably read the Thomas Sowell Reader, Knowledge and Decisions, Basic Economics, Economic Facts and Fallacies, The Housing Boom and Bust, and the Culture trilogy. So Race and Culture, Migrations and Culture, and Conquest and Cultures. But his other books, apart from maybe Charter Schools and Their Enemies, and also maybe Applied Economics, or I'm not sure about that. Apart from those books, all of the other books, they're not worth reading probably, because you already got the gist of Thomas Sowell's ideas. They won't be developed that further in other books. They will just be a repeat of what he said previously. And there's so many other books to read that, although Thomas Sowell is a worthwhile author to read, you don't have to read everything that he's written. There's about half a dozen or slightly more books that are worth reading by him. The rest you can skip. If you want to learn more about non-fiction books that I have a problem with, then you should check out my video of the top 5 worst global politics books that I have read. Otherwise, I'm the Avid Reader, and I will see you readers next time.